Echo is the leader of a family of elephants in Amboseli National Park, southern Kenya. She's easy to recognize because her long, graceful tusks almost cross at the tips. This is the story of 18 eventful months in her life. It's just before dawn. Amboseli is waking up. There's a tent hidden by trees right among the elephant herds. Cynthia Moss has camped here for the past 20 years. You could hardly live closer to elephants. She probably knows Echo better than anyone has ever known a particular wild elephant. 50 elephant families live here on the plains beneath Mount Kilimanjaro. It's one of the least disturbed populations of elephants that remains today in the whole of Africa. Each family group consists of adult females and their young. The adult bulls live separately. If Cynthia is to unravel the complexities of their lives, she must be able to recognize them individually. That can be done most easily by looking at their ears, which get a little tattered and ragged. But eventually, she knows an animal so well that a view of its ears isn't even necessary, any more than you need to see a friend's face to recognize him when he's walking down a street. And now, after 20 years, she knows all 750. Her relationships with Echo and her family are particularly close, and they are regular visitors to her camp.
I first met Echo in 1973. She is now 45 years old and the matriarch or leader of her family. Erin is Echo's adult daughter and beginning to look very much like her. Ella has large chunks out of her ears. She is the second oldest member of the family and may be Echo's sister or niece. Eudora is the youngest adult female. She's just 17 years old and has one calf.
When Cynthia first knew the family, it numbered just 7. Year after year, she watched Echo leading them through good times and bad, taking them on migrations in the wet season, finding food for them during droughts, helping to guard the calves when they arrived. Today, under the leadership of this wise old matriarch, that family has grown to 14. February the 28th, 1990. This could be an important day in Echo's life. 22 months earlier, Cynthia had seen her mating, and the calf must be due to arrive any day now. There's a group of vultures on the ground in the far distance. The birds were squabbling over the remains of what could be an elephant's placenta. Only 30 yards away stood Echo and some of her family. And under Echo, the new baby.
I was thrilled, as always, when I find a newborn calf. This one was a male, and I estimated that he was about 2 hours old. Echo looked tired but fine. I knew she had given birth to at least 5 other calves. But when I moved closer, I noticed that there was something wrong with this one. Apparently, he could not straighten his legs. This was most unusual. I had come across dozens of newborn calves, and they could all stand within half an hour of being born. Enid, Echo's 9-year-old daughter, was taking a lot of interest in her newborn brother, which is typical of older sisters. Enid was encouraging him to walk by moving away when he reached toward her, but to no avail. It was very distressing watching him, and I was as concerned as the rest of the family to see him get onto his feet.
The others had now left to look for water and food. Today that wasn't difficult to find, for they were not far from the great swamp that lies in the heart of Amboseli. But feeding and drinking meant abandoning Echo and the new calf. Ella, with her ragged ears, who had taken over the leadership of the group, turned back to call to Echo and Enid. Enid was clearly torn in her loyalties. She started off in the direction the family had gone, rumbling the elephant contact call. Ella called again and listened for a reply. The pull of the family was strong, and Enid was thirsty and hungry, for by now it was very hot. Echo had found a small waterhole and was splashing herself with cooling mud. But the stranded calf was clearly suffering in the heat. Enid moved farther away, but Echo stayed with her crippled calf, trying to raise him. Eventually, the calf's distress cries were too much for Enid, and back she came. Nightfall, and the family was still split. They called to Echo and Enid, but neither of them would leave the calf. The following morning at dawn, Echo, Enid and the calf were not far from where Cynthia had left them. The calf looked surprisingly strong and had learned to shuffle along on his crippled legs. Echo and Enid were walking very slowly alongside him, adjusting their pace to his and ensuring that he wasn't left behind. He wouldn't be able to hobble around like this for long without his legs rubbing raw and becoming infected. There was, however, a glimmer of hope. Today, there seemed to be some flexibility in the joints. It was hard to resist the temptation to help, but it would have been against both park regulations and scientific objectivity to interfere.
Just then, the rest of the family returned, led by Ella. When families have been split up and then reunite, they always perform this noisy greeting. and it is one of my favorite times to be with elephants. I can't help but thinking that they are simply pleased to see one another. In fact, these ceremonies help to strengthen the bonds between the members of the family. It is a complex world for a baby elephant to be born into, and not everyone is friendly.
But the calf was still in considerable difficulty, and he has to reach up and find Echo's nipple if he is to feed properly. One day later, March the 2nd. The family had hardly moved. They appeared to be resting. Some, indeed, were snoring. The calf was sheltering beneath Echo. He was still crippled, but he was also still struggling to rise.
I was so happy to see Echo's new calf standing properly. It was then that I realized just what a very big calf he was, bigger than any newborn I had ever seen. It seemed that the effort of the last 3 days had exhausted him. But I underestimated his determination. He just wouldn't give up. I now felt confident that he would survive and decided to name him. All the members of Echo's family had names beginning with the letter E. And for this calf, I chose the name Eli.
It was Eli's great size that probably caused his problem. Cramped for space in his mother's womb, the tendons in his legs weren't able to stretch fully. It's a condition that occurs sometimes among horses, but hadn't been observed in elephants before. And at last, he got a proper drink. Now the family could travel. They were heading for the plains, for the rains were due and there would be good grazing down there. They made no allowances for Eli, but he managed to keep up with the brisk pace set by his mother. By the end of each day, his legs were undoubtedly wobbly, but they had not collapsed on him. He was going to be all right. March the 6th, Eli's a week old, and the family are still travelling, covering as much as 10 kilometres a day. Other families had come together on these plains below Kilimanjaro to graze on the new-sprung grass. Here, too, there were a couple of dozen adult bulls. All in all, 200 elephants had gathered here, forming one huge and spectacular herd. For Cynthia, this was an excellent opportunity to check on the progress of other families that she hadn't seen for a long time.
The elephants in Amboseli are exceptionally relaxed because here they're not hunted, and so they're not afraid. It is a real privilege to be able to sit with them and watch their natural behavior. When I'm in the middle of a herd like this, I often feel that I'm at a big family reunion. Like at all family get-togethers, the youngsters love to play. Adult wildebeest make good, if reluctant, playmates for young elephants. Even my Land Rover is something to play with. As far as Eli is concerned, my vehicle has always been a part of his surroundings. He treats it much the same way as any bush or tree which he might come upon and investigate. The older animals just tend to ignore my presence. I was pleased to see Eli looking so robust and healthy. He was very active and curious about everything. Studying elephants so closely for 20 years has given me insights into their family relationships. And one of the things I've discovered is that the young females act as babysitters. Eli's older sisters and aunts are never far from him. They watch over him and stop him from getting into mischief.
Males leave their families when they are about 14. 9-year-old Emo is an orphan, and he was beginning to make the move rather earlier than normal. He spends much of his time at the edge of the family group, seeking the company of others of his own age. Today he had found Kyle, a youngster from another family, and by tusking the ground, he issues an invitation to a sparring match. This is not a real fight, just a friendly game. The movements are slow and gentle, but even so, the youngsters are able in these bouts to assess one another's weight and strength. So, as each grows up, he gets to know all the other males of his age in the population. But Eli is still too young for that sort of thing. The end of March. Cynthia has to leave Amboseli, but she will be back at the beginning of the dry season. When she returned in June, the rains had been over for a month and the land was already beginning to dry out. The first thing to be done was to check on where the various families were. She spotted Echo and her family on their way to the central swamp. There's nearly always water here, for the swamp is fed by underground streams that flow down the flanks of Kilimanjaro from the permanent snowfields around its summit. Sedges and reeds are not particularly nutritious, but there's little choice during the dry season. And even if there's not much variety in the food, there's still a lot of fun to be had in the water. Echo gingerly leads Eli into the cold water. When adult females like Ella take the plunge, then you know they're very relaxed. Away from the swamp, the land was beginning to turn brown. The dry season was taking its grip. Echo and her family left the swamp to browse on phoenix palms, and Cynthia followed them.
One of my special interests has been how calves develop, and I wanted to see how Eli was progressing. Eli has met a young female from a nearby family, and the way he starts to play with her is typical of a male calf. But Eli will actually have to wait another 25 to 30 years before he can put the sexual skills he is practicing for to proper use. Meanwhile, to Enid, his older sister, he is still the baby brother who needs to be watched over, while his mother is busy feeding in the palm trees. But it isn't only social skills that Eli has to acquire. He also has to learn how to feed and drink. At this stage, he hasn't learned how to drink properly. He spills more than he swallows. He'll have to learn from watching Echo. Gathering grass with his trunk is also proving to be difficult. Eli's solution is to bend down and bite it off. I call that cheating.
His mother shows him how it should be done. Palm leaves are even trickier. Enter Dionysus. He's about 50 years old, the third largest bull in Amboseli. 11 feet at the shoulder, a good 4 feet taller than Echo, and around 12,000 pounds, over twice as heavy as she is. Echo is munching a palm heart, and Dionysus seems to fancy it. But Echo, smaller though she is not going to be bullied. He's so much taller than any of the females that he can get to parts of the tree that others can't reach. Most of the lush green vegetation has now gone, and a younger bull is feeding on the thorny acacia trees. The bark is very nutritious, but chewing the branches takes a lot of strength and energy, and the acacia is so thorny that a lot of care is needed. Several other bulls are also here. They defer to Dionysus and show their respect by stretching their trunks in his direction. It's almost as though they are in awe of him. At the moment, they're placid enough, but they're building up their strength, ready for the time when each independently will become sexually active for about 3 months of the year. A little gentle sparring among themselves keeps them fit. Clumps of dry grass ripped from the ground add still more dust to the clouds that are now blowing over the parched land. November came, but not the rains that should have come with it. What little fell in December barely dampened the surface of the ground. When Cynthia returned in January, Amboseli was in the grip of a serious drought. remains of the drought's victims lay everywhere. But then Cynthia saw what she had been dreading.
It appeared to be a dead newborn elephant calf. Standing over it was its mother, Grace, a large, one-tusked female, and her 3 daughters. Clearly, they were very distressed. When Grace felt the calf, it twitched, and then I knew it was alive and understood why they were so distraught. Her older calf tries to suckle and is rejected, which is normal when a mother has a new calf. She's now 4 and old enough to be weaned. The calf was pale and tiny, and I estimated it was 4 to 5 months premature. Perhaps the stress of the drought had caused the early birth. I then watched something that I had never seen before. Grace was probably trying to get the calf into the shade. They had been out in the hot sun for hours and were no doubt desperate for water. But such is the strength of the bonds between an elephant mother and her calves that they would not leave each other or the tiny calf, even though it was nearly dead. I knew there was no hope for this calf.
Mercifully, the calf died that night. But Grace stayed in the area for the following 3 days, returning again and again to the hidden place where its body lay. Cynthia had still not found Echo and her family, and she was beginning to worry about them. As she searched in the west of the park, she came across a female in a strange posture. It was Astrid, an 11-year-old, and she was giving birth. This was her first calf. Her mother, Alison, was standing close by, ready to assist her. Astrid was obviously amazed and alarmed by what she had produced. Alison came over immediately. It's typical for a grandmother or another female relative to remove the fetal sac and help the calf get to its feet while the mother is recovering. Alison appeared to realize that the calf was dead, and she retreated. Another female with her calf approached the body. This was Audrey. Although her calf was several months old, it was nevertheless smaller than the stillborn one.
It is at times like this that I wish I knew what was going on in their heads. What signals and sensations are they picking up? Why do they use their back feet in this way? Perhaps their souls are particularly sensitive, and they are feeling for signs of life. Finally, Astrid herself approached her dead calf, apparently trying to assess and understand the situation. But I really had no idea what she was experiencing.
The rest of the family moved away. The next morning, Astrid was still there, guarding the body of her baby. Cynthia continued her search for Echo and her family, increasingly worried about what had happened to them. And at last, she found them. They were standing out on the open plain. They were certainly thin, but they were not gaunt and starving. It was some minutes before Cynthia realized that there was a new member, a tiny calf. The calf was Ella's, a male, about a month old. Happily, he was clearly healthy and normal. Food was in short supply, and the family was searching for roots by kicking up the ground. This synchronization between trunk and foot is invaluable for jobs like this, but it takes a lot of practice to get as good as this. The smaller calves have not yet perfected the technique. Eli finds it easier to take what his cousin Elspeth has excavated, and she tolerantly allows him to do so. The calves were eating their parents' dung. Babies regularly do this. It's a way of establishing the essential microorganisms they need to have in their stomachs to digest their food. But normally the habit is abandoned after a few months. Ella's new calf seems to be positively relishing it, and indeed among vegetarian animals the habit is not unusual, for quite a lot of nutriment can be extracted if dung is digested for a second time. And still the drought continued. Day after day passed. Without food, the family were lethargic, saving their energy. It was up to Echo to get them through this crisis. The family appeared to be waiting for her to make the decisions. Her movements suggested that she was ready to lead them somewhere. That gentle rumble means, let's go. The whole family responded immediately. Echo waited for the stragglers and then headed for an area that the family hadn't visited for a long time. Her route took them through a patch of palm trees, and there they came across a pile of bones, elephant bones.
One of the great mysteries about elephants is the reaction to the remains of their own kind. When they come upon the carcass of an elephant, they become tense and quiet, and approach it cautiously. They do not behave this way toward the bones of other animals. Elephants seem to have some sort of awareness of death. They'll attempt to bury a fresh carcass, and they'll touch and stroke the bones, and sometimes carry them away. They usually concentrate on the skull, possibly to try and recognize the individual. These are the bones of Emily. She was Echo's closest companion, maybe her sister. I wonder if she and the others are remembering her.
March 1991. At last, fresh winds begin to blow and storm clouds accumulate. And on March the 24th, the drought broke. The rains were generous. The water sank deep into the ground, stimulating the withered plants to fresh growth and germinating the seeds. In another few days, the park would be green and there would be plenty to eat. By June, the elephants had full stomachs and plenty of energy. This is the time to breed. Patrick is one of the biggest of all the bulls. The gland on his temple is discharging, and he's dribbling a trail of pungently scented urine. He's become sexually active. He's in must and looking for a female. Lexi, a smaller, younger male, is on the same quest, but he knows when it's best to retreat. Another bull in must, Beach Ball, has detected the scent of a female, which indicates that she is an estrus and sexually receptive. Lexi has caught the same scent. He's deferred to Patrick, but he's not going to do the same thing to Beach Ball, who is more his size. The two face one another. They have not yet settled their dominance rank. This is a dangerous moment for them both. They try to keep head on to one another. If one turns, the other could knock him down and stab him with his tusk. with a calf beside her, waits close by, watching the progress of the tournament. During a lull, Lexi vents his feelings on a more passive opponent. This distracts Beach Ball's attention and breaks the mood. Lexi, who had been losing ground, seizes his chance to break away. Beach Ball pursues him, but the fight is over. Beach Ball has established his seniority. It had taken him 10 hours and 20 minutes. Nearby, a family continued to graze, but now they have a visitor who fears no competitors.
Patrick has found Odette, who is in estrus. Females tend to breed about once every 4 years. They are receptive for between 3 to 6 days and will be courted by several males, but they prefer to mate with the big bulls and must. Patrick has no trouble courting Odette because he is just what she's looking for. A token chase with a bit of coyness on Odette's part leads to mating. The whole family gets excited and takes part in the proceedings, performing what we call the mating pandemonium. Deafening calls, plus Odette's special post-mating rumble, signal that she is available. And if there is anyone bigger and better than Patrick out there, he should come and get her. This behavior leads to her finding the best father for her calf.
Once again, Echo and her family have come to visit Cynthia in her camp. Eli is now 15 months old, confident enough of his strength to tease a group of buffaloes that have come to graze in the cool of the evening. He's about to set an ambush. There's a lot for him still to learn, but Echo, his mother, will be there to supervise and help. She may yet produce several more calves, but whatever happens to the family, Cynthia will be there to watch and record in the years to come.